Growing up with the NES, the Castlevania series was my all-time favorite on the console.
I played through Castlevania 1, 2, and 3 countless times as a kid and couldn't get enough of the whip-wielding protagonist Simon Belmont as he vigilantly fought classic foes such as Frankenstein, the Grim Reaper, and even Dracula himself. And when I heard that they would be releasing Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo, my bones rattled with excitement, and it did not disappoint. Super Castlevania 4 would go on to become one of my favorite games of all time. But there were others. Other Castlevania games which eluded me like a sinister vapor somehow snuck over into enemy territory. How could this be? To me, Castlevania was synonymous with Nintendo. How could these two old friends part ways? How could Castlevania betray my beloved Nintendo? Well, I had decided at that moment that these games couldn't be good. They were horrible. They had to be. And what's this I hear? No Simon or Trevor Belmont? Who's Richter? And who's this dork with white hair and a sword? Where's the whip? Oh man, they've just screwed this whole thing up. But soon it seemed there was hope on the horizon. The dark ages would come to an end, and a golden ray of sunshine would shatter the darkness like a flaming whip, and everything would be set right again. With Castlevania 64. But that is not this story.
Well, time went on, and little fanboy Duke grew up to realize that although Nintendo makes great consoles and games, maybe it's time to give some of those other consoles a fair shake. And maybe, just maybe along the way, I missed out on some good games. Maybe even some that are great. Is it possible that a Castlevania game, other than those released for Nintendo, could hold a candle to the beloved originals? Is it conceivable that one could be as good as Super Castlevania 4? Is it fathomable that one could even be better? I present to you my review of Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the Sony PlayStation.
Well, I suppose we should start with the story. I was never one to pay too much attention to stories in video games of this kind, but this one is sort of hard to ignore, mainly due to the mood-jarring voice acting, but we'll get to that in a bit. This story starts right where Castlevania Rondo of Blood left off. You get to play out the final scene as Richter Belmont defeating Dracula. How cool is that? After you defeat the Dark Lord, it goes on to explain that on a moonlit night 4 years later, Richter had gone missing and suddenly Dracula's castle, Castlevania, has re-emerged. His friend and fellow vampire hunter Maria Renard sets out to find him. Meanwhile, Alucard, Dracula spelled backwards, which is Dracula's son and the main character in this game, has awakened from a self-imposed slumber and is drawn to Castlevania as well. And this is where the real action begins. As you progress in the game, you periodically run into characters that generate dialogue exchanges, furthering the story along. You bump into Maria several times in the game, as well as Death,
Alucard,
Richter Belmont, a librarian, and many other characters. In a nutshell, Alucard discovers that Richter proclaims to be Lord of the Castle. If you defeat Richter without discovering that he is being controlled by the Dark Priest Shaft, the credits roll and the game ends.
It's over, Belmont.
Or does it? If you want the proper ending, you need to obtain the gold and silver rings, which opens up a secret area where you meet Maria again. This time she gives you holy glasses so you can see and defeat the evil force that is controlling Richter.
With you.
What are these?
If you wear these, you can see beyond evil illusions.
Once defeated, Shaft inverts Castlevania and exclaims that Dracula's resurrection is imminent. You then have to traverse the castle again upside down. You need to defeat the bosses that keep the 5 relics that will enable Dracula to be resurrected. You defeat Shaft, Dracula is resurrected, more dialogue ensues, and once again the world is safe from the Master of Vampires and his evil minions. Now let's talk about the main method in which the story is delivered, the dialogue and voice acting. At first, the abruptly out-of-place voice acting seemed like it might be a sore spot in the game.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
It
was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh. I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Tribute? You steal men's souls and make them your slaves.
In a game that seemed to go through painstaking measures to establish a very medieval and old-world atmosphere with its art style and music, to have, shall we say, very American accented actors delivering the dialogue seemed counterintuitive.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets.
But as the game went on, I found myself looking forward to the character interactions and to hearing their dialogue exchanges. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but for some reason I felt that it added to the character and charm of the game.
Alucard.
Not the talkative type, I can see. Well, perhaps we'll meet again.
Being the first Castlevania game that I've played with voice acting, I found that it was a fresh take on the franchise that I ended up really enjoying. And yes, the dialogue was a little cheesy, but that too just somehow seemed to work for me.
I need your help.
Young master, I cannot aid one who opposes the master.
Now, it was very common to have translation issues in video games from this era.
Did you say ridiculous?
But I did find myself wondering one thing.
Now, wouldn't you think if you were an American voice actor reading the script and you came across an obvious translation error, don't you think maybe you'd raise your hand? Excuse me, I think this is supposed to say, what are you doing here? Do you mind if I correct this and say it properly? They just went with it.
You seem human, and yet, what do you here?
What do you hear?
Now let's get to the good stuff and talk about the gameplay. The first thing that I noticed with this iteration of the franchise was with the buckets of spewing blood, provocative statues, and half-naked female enemies, this was not your Nintendo Castlevania. This game had an edge to it that stood out prominently from the others in the series. Another obvious change was the non-linear gameplay. I've often heard this game compared to Super Metroid, and I'm aware that it's the game that coined the phrase Metroidvania, but I didn't realize how Metroidy it was. Most notably, the life-regenerating save rooms and the mapping system. And this is in no way a bad thing. Traversing the castle any which way you please, gaining new abilities and revisiting areas you couldn't access before, breaking through a wall to discover a secret room, this was so fun, and it added another layer of depth to the process of vampire hunting. In the previous Castlevania games, you went through the castle. In Symphony of the Night, you get to explore the castle. Another big change was the addition of the RPG elements. Instead of the simple weapon upgrade system of the previous games, now there are countless weapons, magical items, armor, food items, capes, and many other things to collect and experiment with. Certain armors and other wearables will protect you against specific attacks, and certain weapons and magic items will help you against specific foes. You can also level up Alucard along the way. The more enemies you destroy, the more powerful you become. Going back and defeating an enemy with one powerful strike that used to take several hits to dispatch was so satisfying. One of the most impressive aspects of the game was the unbelievable amount of enemy diversity. It seemed like every new hallway I went down, I confronted a brand new foe. From the familiar, to the unusual, to the downright bizarre, the enemies in this game are just fantastic. And when the castle got flipped upside down, they didn't just get lazy and stick in the same old baddies with some color changes. Nope, a whole new set of monsters, ghosts, and beasts stood in my way. I was so impressed with the enemy design in this game that grinding was never boring or monotonous. Every strike of your sword, every scream from a witch, every howl from a slain beast was insanely rewarding. Just as with the enemies, the soundtrack was quite diverse and even somewhat eclectic, at least for a Castlevania game. There is music that pays homage to the original games. But there's also a variety of tracks that went outside of what you might expect to hear. At first, some of the tracks seemed out of place and felt a bit awkward to me. But as they grew on me, I realized that it was just another quirky component of the game that just seemed to somehow work. The music complemented the style of the game wonderfully, and promoted the mood and tone that helped make Symphony of the Night the beloved classic that it is. with one notable exception.
Yes! Yes! Finally, I beat you, Dracula! Yes! Go back to the shadows from whence you came! Yes!
Just like the wind, I've always been.
What is this? Kenny G and Bette Midler? Make it stop! My ears! My ears!
Controlling Alucard was a smooth and fluid task for the most part. In order to reach every last corner of the castle, you need to obtain certain abilities that enable you to reach and enter new areas. Alucard can eventually turn into a wolf, a bat, and mist. And once the leap stone is found, he can perform a double jump, which is my favorite. I did find that turning into the bat, which has to be done quite often after the castle is upside down, is a little slow and clunky. Also, I never found much use for the wolf. The wolf could build up speed and plow through enemies, but I always find that it's much easier to just hack away with my sword. Overall, the controls are tight and responsive and make the platforming elements of the game a blast. Finally, the graphics and art style of the game are just superb. I've always been one to notice and enjoy background detail in games, and this one did not disappoint. There are intricate details and nuances in the rooms and halls that enhance the mood and bring the game to life, like discovering the blood cape in a blood-soaked room, seeing prisoners walk up and grab the bars of their cells, and discovering the creepy confession room. I love these types of details in games, and with the beautifully designed background art, statues, and overall level design, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a visual spectacle that continuously impressed me screen after screen.
So in conclusion, because I have no nostalgia attached to this game, I have a real hard time saying that it's better than the originals on the NES and the Super Nintendo. But what I will say is that it is a 10 out of 10, 5-star, 2 thumbs up game that I cannot recommend enough. I had such a good time playing this. It doesn't get much better than this if you ask me. It's everything you want in a Castlevania game and much more. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please let me know how I did on my first game review. I do plan on doing other reviews maybe in the future for games that I've never played before, like this one. So please like and subscribe. And again, I really appreciate the feedback to let me know how I did. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.